Hello, college football fans. We couldn't wait. Urban Meyer wanted to get an Urban's take with Tim May. That's me, yours truly, on the record here post spring, and as teams go into their off season programs. And Urban, just number one, coming out of spring. What do you remember most about coming out of spring as a college head football coach, a guy that guided 3 national champions? What do you remember most? Feeling a little bit of angst about what you didn't get done, or do you remember feeling pretty good about what you had in the barn, so to speak?
Well, number one is injuries. God forbid if you lost a guy that's going to be out for, you start talking about knee injuries, ankle injuries, those start bleeding into summer training camp. And then obviously the most important position on the field is that quarterback spot. So,
Yeah.
You have a returning starter. When I knew I had JT Barrett, I had that returning quarterback that was coming back for, his 4th or 5th year, I felt great. Then I spent a lot of time on everything else. But when you got a new quarterback coming, and we had Dwayne Haskins and the whole Dwayne Haskins, Joe Burrow battle, we had to make that decision. Joe left, but then it was all about getting that team ready or getting that quarterback ready. I know there's some, Ohio State's one of them, but you got Alabama, Georgia, you got Texas, you got some big dogs out there that they got to get that quarterback ready, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you brought them up. Let's talk about Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, not necessarily maybe in that order, but Kirby Smart looks like he's got his quarterback coming out of the spring, kid named Carson Beck, who had a really good spring and a spring game, capped it off. And, he's following a guy, Stetson Bennett, who all he did was win 2 straight national championships. So no pressure, right? But then you follow that with Alabama. Their quarterback situation seems really up in the air when you consider they went into spring with Jay Milroe and the other kid, and then all of a sudden Tyler Buckner, who started against Ohio State last year for Notre Dame, he transfers into Alabama from Notre Dame, and look who happens to be Alabama's offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, who was Notre Dame's offensive coordinator a year ago, and then you got Ohio State with Cal McCord looks like replacing C.J. Stroud, or is he? Because, Devin Brown injured a finger there late in the spring and couldn't play in the spring game. But Ryan Day was reluctant to name a starter coming out of the spring. And so just like, is the guy in the best shape right now, Kirby Smart, since it looks like everybody kind of knows who his guy is, and probably he does too?
I think so. But I think Ohio State's in great shape. If someone would have won that hands down, the other guy might have left. And, I hear that I remember people saying if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. I don't agree with that at all. If you got 2 quarterbacks, you got 2 quarterbacks. And the Alabama scenario is, I haven't studied it that closely, but I've been reading about it, and that's a precarious situation there. You certainly can't get 3 ready to go. You're going to have to narrow it down, and especially if they're young players. The guy at Notre Dame's transfer is a very experienced guy, but I think Georgia and Ohio State are in very good positioning. I think Texas, you didn't mention them, but, don't sleep on Texas this year. I was talking to Mark Pantoni, and I was talking to the recruiting director at Ohio State, and some other man-for-man roster against roster. It's hard to say Texas doesn't have the best roster in college football right now.
Yeah.
Now, they got to play. It's been a while since Texas has been good or elite. But their quarterback, I watched him live against Alabama before he got hurt, and they could have won that game. And we all know Quinn Ewers from when he was at Ohio State. So I think Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas are in pretty good shot.
Yeah, that's interesting. The funny thing about the Alabama deal, because, you remember you and I were talking about Jay Milroe, the kid who went in for Bryce Young last year when he got banged up. And he actually, I think, started the Tennessee game. Or the Texas A&M game. And but the bottom line was he was so inconsistent in a lot of ways. And it looks like a lot of that inconsistency followed him into the spring, whereas Ty Simpson, the guy challenging him really for that starting job in the spring, maybe looked a little bit better, whatever. But then all of a sudden they bring in a transfer quarterback who started at Notre Dame last year. What does that do for that room, do you think, Urban? Because you've seen, we're going to talk about transfer portal, believe me, here in a minute, but what does that do for that room when there is some unsettled situation going on?
Well, when the quarterback transferred from Notre Dame, I would love to be with Tommy Rees being the offense coordinator there. You'd love to be a fly on the wall and actually what was said to him.
Yeah.
Why did he pick? There's two quarterbacks already there. Why did he go there? And the one thing about Alabama, when we all witnessed Ohio State get, or Alabama put it on Ohio State in the national championship game, you had first-round receivers all over that field. I didn't see that last year.
Yeah.
I kept hearing about the young talent. Of course, they got great talent. It's Alabama, but Bryce Young's the #1 pick in the NFL draft. You didn't feel that same vertical push. You didn't see that. I mean, Alabama when they had those wideouts, they're unbeatable because you had a great run game. All you had to do was flip the bubble screens out there and get the ball in those guys' hands, and they were out. So I think Alabama, it's going to be really interesting to watch them in training camp. Not only the quarterback, but can they get anywhere close to the skill positions they had a couple years ago?
Hey, you as a head coach, and imagine yourself being in, like, for example, Nick Saban's shoes again, or whatever. Who do you put the pressure on to make it happen? I mean, pressure, I think, is the right word, because there's pressure when you're starting quarterback at Georgia or Ohio State or Alabama. But who is the pressure really on here to make that happen? Is it the actual players? Is it, do you level it on Tommy Rees and the assistant coaches? Where do you apply that?
I've always had the belief that you put the pressure on the position coach. It's deep down, I think, I know. I mean, the coordinator and the head coach have a good idea who the quarterback's going to be.
Yeah.
If they're of course they're not going to say that to the media because they don't want to offend. The injuries happen, but in their mind right now, they have that those places that we mentioned, they know who's going to take the first snap if everything goes as planned. If something changes, injury, someone beats someone out. But I always believed that I put pressure on the position coaches, and it's ultimately their job, because the amount of time you spend with that quarterback getting ready is going to be critical. And you're allowed to do things now that you were not allowed to do in the past. They're going to meet a lot this summer. They're going to do a lot of the practices, where you obviously not practicing, but you're getting ready for the season. So a lot of time spent. I remember Ohio State and them, they were getting CJ Stroud ready a couple of years ago. They were doing all kinds of stuff in the off season because it's legal now.
Yeah. You got to see a little bit of Ohio State. You were up for a coaches clinic thing, which, had you and, the Ryan Day, the president of Ohio State coach, Jim Tressel, former Ohio State coach, and John Cooper, all on the same day as answering questions. A lot of them coming from Ryan Day, a lot of answers coming from John Cooper. But it was a very interesting, very well received situation. But you also got to spend a little time, and obviously you keep in touch with Ohio State. Your son-in-law is the quarterback coach there. Speaking of the quarterbacks, but Corey Dennis. But the bottom line is do you get the sense Ohio State has straightened out some things defensively? What was the sense you got from the conversations you had with Ryan Day, who's now playing the role more of a head coach than a offensive coordinator?
Yeah, they have a lot of confidence in Jim Knowles, the defense coordinator, and you should. He's an experienced guy. The first year out, at times they played great, and at times they gave up some big ones. So
yeah,
I'm sure there's been a lot of emphasis on lack of explosive plays, because that was what beat us last year. But no, they're in a good position. They got the best player in college football in Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm so anxious to watch him, prepare and play, because he's different than most. Someone's saying, would he transfer for an NIL deal somewhere else? What I know about Marvin Harrison, which I know a lot about him, I don't know him, but I know of him, and I know people that know of him, and that family is incredible. He's all Buckeye, and I think he's going to give it all. People say, why should he even play his third year? I mean, they want to go beat that team up north. They want to go win a Big Ten championship and maybe more. So, they feel much, to answer your question, they feel much better about the defense being year 2 in that system.
Yeah, speaking of Marvin Harrison Jr., you brought him up. I mean, there are a few guys I've been around, Urban. I've been covering Ohio State for 40 seasons now, and there are a few that I can remember that just love working at getting better at football than that guy does. I mean, it's crazy, his work ethic. And it's impressive too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he's the best player in college football last year.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be close this year. And now it's can we get him the ball, and can he stay healthy and still prep the way he is? I think he's a unique individual. I think he'll be the #1 draft pick, and I think he'll be the first receiver to win a Heisman in many, many years.
You remember when you decided to do a cannonball, a head first dive into coaching, especially college football coaching, and you end up as a GA at Ohio State in 1986? There was a guy named Chris Carter who was a wide receiver there who used to remember the catches. We got to watch practice back then. I don't know if you remember that or not. And the few of us who wanted to, and he would have a 1 or 2 catches a practice, much less a game, that just wowed you. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the sort of the same guy, isn't he? In a different build, a different maybe approach, but the same guy, isn't he?
Yeah, Chris was a monster at practice, and that's what I've seen a couple practices, but once again, I know a lot of people there, and it's every day. Chris Carter, I remember it was about a 30-degree day, and the ball was thrown behind him, and he caught the ball in impossible 30 degrees.
Yes.
The wind blowing, and he reaches out with his bare hand here and grabs the ball, the back half of the ball. But he was, it's still hard to say he's not the greatest receiver of all time, but I'll tell you, Marvin Harrison Jr. is knocking on the door. I mean, I think at the end of the year, he'll be right with Chris Carter as the best ever to play in the Scarlet and Gray.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I should get a pretty good vote in that because I've watched most of them. Hey, let's jump into coaching now. I mean, put your coaching shoes back on. This is one of the reasons why you don't want to put your coaching shoes back on a full-time basis. But you're at Colorado, and Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, what they've had 52 players enter the transfer portal since he was named the coach, and 43 left since the spring game. They've replaced quite a few of those, obviously. Urban, that's crazy, isn't it? And can you? I mean, how would you wrap your head around that if you were a head coach? Because reason I'm asking this is you have that many guys leave thinking you're going to get 43 guys who were better than those guys. You understand what I'm saying? That's a little bit of wishful thinking, but I don't even know how you do the math or the dynamics on that. I mean, can you wrap your head around what's going on right now?
I can't. I tried. I called Mark Pantoni again and asked him, said, now, have the rules changed? Because there used to be a 25 initial rule.
Yeah.
How do you function? How do you get that? I can't even imagine the recruiting going on right now and talking to other players and other programs and trying to get them to come to you. And then I'm also trying to wrap my hand around, about players being told just to leave. We've all been, as a coach, it wouldn't be truthful to say there's times I wanted to tell players to leave. You just really can't do that. You can make it hard on them, make they either improve or they do leave. But, I don't know. You saw Michigan State get lightning in the bottle when they won 10 or 11 games the other year, when they had 27 or 30 new transfers. Now you're talking about 40. The number is astonishing that since spring ball ended, the spring game, and by the way, a beautiful day in Boulder. I know it snowed and all that, but I'm just talking about the crowd, the energy. That place deserves that. By the way, I was at Colorado State when Colorado won the national title. That's a great place. I can't believe they've fallen off the way they have. But Deion is a friend of mine. I really appreciate him. I think he's doing right by the player in a lot of ways, but also you just wonder what happened to those guys that had a full scholarship to Colorado. And I wonder if the media will do story follow-up, say what happened to all these players? Where are they? And ultimately, I guess you're 1-11, and it's been really bad football for a long time. Deion has a right to go in there, and that's what he's paid to do and hired to do. Go flip the switch and flip it around.
Yeah. And I think the way I understand it is you can basically tell a guy he's no longer playing football, but there's some kind of ways where if they decide not to leave, they can maintain their scholarship in some form or fashion, obviously to do right by them and stuff. But, Arizona State has had 27 enter the portal since Kevin Dillingham was named their head coach back in the late part of the season there. And then, of course, Matt Rule at Nebraska, they've had 23 leave, and but have replaced them. And there's a guy I've got my eye on, by the way, I think the Big Ten West, man. Wow. that's going to be interesting with Matt Rule and Luke Fickell in it now, isn't it? I mean, at Wisconsin, that's
someone's going to have to separate. And I think the Iowa, I'm a fan of Iowa. I'm a fan of the way they play. I'm a fan of how, I think last year was a blemish on that offense. It was bad. It was really, really hard to watch. We did a couple of their games. And the hardest part was a turnover. That's one thing. If you're not moving the ball, take care of the ball and punt it. Because you got one of the best D coordinators in America, and Parker, and and I just think that uncharacteristically the line was not very good. I just think Iowa's a team to beat in the West. I do. I think Nebraska. I've been a fan of Nebraska since Tom Osborne days. I can't understand. I do understand it. Recruiting's so much different now than it was. But you talk about a fan base. You talk about energy. And they got a coach that's done it before at different places, that took a Temple and took a Baylor. So he's a builder. And I think he's going to put that pretty quickly.
Yeah. And of course, Luke walked into Wisconsin and he's flipped that place upside down from an offensive approach to everything else. I mean, that you talk about a fan base, there's a fan base too. I mean, I think a storm is rising just when they're about to get rid of the Big Ten West. We'll talk about that.
Interesting about Wisconsin. You have to ask yourself if it's really broke.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. And you go back in the last 25 years, is there a more consistent program than Wisconsin? And I remember I talked to Luke, and that's a tough one to walk into. I always tell him this, that when you take over an organization, you either take a fire hose to it, you take a garden hose to it, or you just clean it up a little bit. I went to Bowling Green, that was a fire hose.
Yeah.
I think they're 1-11 or 2-9, something like that. You go to Utah, it's a garden hose. You go to Florida, it's just clean it up. And certainly Ohio State, it wasn't broken. You just had to, maybe change it your way a little bit. Luke has got a tough job. He already changed the offense. He brought in a really good coach. What do you go? Do you go completely air raid? And I don't think you can. I think in the minutes, if they, which of course they'll lose a game or something, you're going to have that old guard at Wisconsin saying, this is the way we've done it.
Yeah.
So Luke's got to win the players, but he's also got to spread himself around that very tradition-rich place in Madison.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about programs too, though, because like you've talked about many times, 2012, you walk in there, things are not to your standard. And you lowered the boom immediately right after the bowl game, as we all know, with that early morning workout. Message was sent loud and clear and stuff. And like you said, players had the right, based on Ohio State facing a year of probation, had the right to leave if they wanted to. And basically none of them did. Y'all go undefeated in 2012, don't get to play in a bowl game or for the Big Ten championship. But bottom line is that was the seed that grew that oak, right, in 2014. And every place isn't created equal, right?
No. And that was very risky what I did. I look back now and, can you really do that nowadays? You talk about the transfer portal. After that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we would have 85 players in that transfer portal. But they didn't leave. There was that love for Ohio State. I think they believed in our coaches. And by the way, only the seniors were allowed to leave, and they didn't leave. So this is a much different era. Luke has got of the new coaches. I think that's a really tough situation. And he's a great coach. He's a great friend. But you're talking about Wisconsin now. Wisconsin's it's not like they've been bad.
Right.
It's easy. It's much easier to go into a place and blow it up than it is to tiptoe around. I really struggled tiptoeing around early on at Ohio State.
Yeah, I know. But you struggle tiptoeing around anywhere. You struggle tiptoeing around when you're fishing, don't you?
Yeah.
Huh?
Oh, I can show you where I'm looking at now. So.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, life is tough. Hey, college football playoff. Final thing: college football playoff released its 12-team playoff schedule for starting next year and stuff. And the first 4 games, of course, are going to be the eight lower seeds are going to be playing a first round at the higher of those 8 lower seeds home field, leading into semifinals and then finals, or quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. Just what's your take on the idea of getting to host a playoff game, a game of that magnitude in mid-December? Just I don't know, just what are your thoughts about that schedule as you looked at it?
I'm 50-50 on that. I mean, I think it's fantastic. And if you're, you're fortunate in Ann Arbor or State College or Columbus, Ohio to draw, or South Bend, Indiana to draw a nice day,
Yeah.
you just hate to see a game that's completely a result of weather. We lost in 2015, a really tough game, and it still haunts me to this day. There was a driving rainstorm, the wind blowing, and yeah, we lost to Michigan State. That was our first loss in the Big Ten in 30 games. And you just don't want, and the reality is you're going to have to weather games. It's just when you start talking about the playoffs, is it not better to go to Indianapolis and play that game so they play their best? Because the one thing matters is players. God bless the fans and everybody else, but those players deserve a chance to play their best.
Yeah. Gene Smith caught a lot of heat because he talked about that if Ohio State was in that situation of playing possibly at Lucas Oil, and I'm totally in agreement with him for what you just said, and also based on the team that you and now Ryan Day have built, help get it going, and it's built for playing in prime conditions, isn't it? I mean, you're still what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, it'd be to have weather is an absolute equalizer. It's also can be causation to injuries. That's been proven over time. So you have to be very smart how you do this. So, but you get one of those southern teams that roll into Columbus, Ohio, and hopefully it's a 28-degree day and clear skies. Because that I was always worried when I was at Florida. If I remember we went to Vanderbilt a couple times and it was cold. It was hard getting those players out of the locker room.
Yeah, and that's just Nashville, ladies and gentlemen. That's just Nashville. Hey, speaking of weather, before you go, you're enjoying life now. You're not retired. You're retired from coaching, and evidently that's still a bulletin to some people because it was a big deal last month when you came into Ohio State and told the guys there that you were no longer interested in being a head coach because of a lot of things. But what do you spend your today? What do you spend your time doing today, Urban? Obviously, you're still going to do Fox and all that kind of stuff in the fall. But what do you spend your day to day?
I had a tough day today. I had 7:30 tennis, and then I got back into boxing classes, and I'm not going to box, but just a great workout at a gym down the street. And then I went out to the range and hit some balls because I got a big golf situation coming up that I have to be ready for. I played Augusta National last week. So, yeah, there's a nice life out there I was not that aware of.
Hey, real quick, what'd you think about Augusta National? Had you played it before?
I did. I played it before several times, and it just you make that turn on Magnolia Lane, and it's green as green, and as much fun as golf is, it's the dinner, it's the camaraderie, it's history. We took a tour. It's probably my 5th tour of that place, and spectacular. Hey,
real quick before you go too, by the way, I got to cover that thing one time in 1984, the first year Ben Crenshaw won it. And like I tell people, there's few places in life where you go to and they're actually better and cooler than you thought they were going to be, right? And that's Augusta National. I understand you're in a little bit of at least interest of being on some boards and companies and stuff like that. What will you bring to the table if in fact you end up doing some things like that?
Well, I've done it before. I think the correlation between corporate America, and this is something I read about. I had many friends in it, but I never experienced it until 2 years ago. And I was part of a board and part of an executive coach team that worked with the CEO. And the correlation's the same. To me, it's about culture and leadership, and you win with people. There was a famous book by Woody Hayes many years ago. And so how do you drive people? I think it's much different. I've told people this, that you always have to evaluate the situation you're in. And college football to me is a heavy 5. And that means as competitive and as intense and that's the way we work. You move to corporate America and you have to understand that it's much different. You can't be like that with your employees. You just got to be very cautious because you have to know the intensity level that you have to work with. That's what I learned my 2 years of working on those 2 boards I was with before. And I look forward to doing that again.
Yeah. I think you make a great addition because you do bring the fire and intensity to the situation also, or clarification. Let's put that away. But Urban Meyer, man, it's always a pleasure dealing with you, as you well know. And at least I've told you that many times. And hey, we'll get together again in midsummer and do a little preview before we head into the fall. You up for that?
I look forward to it and love hanging with you, Tim.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, until the next time with Urban's Take, this is Tim May. We'll see you then.